Hayley, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Pam. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah. So, what is your gymnastics journey? I know you are based in Calgary. Did you do gymnastics as a kid? And then what led you to now starting CAPTivate Gymnastics?
I actually grew up in Toronto, still in Canada, and I was the queen of recreational gymnastics all the way through. So I wanted to go competitive. I wasn't particularly good at gymnastics. Nobody was asking me to go competitive, but I wanted to go competitive because I just loved the sport so much. But my parents were really not interested in me training multiple times a week and then having to drive me to and from practice a million times a week. I also have two siblings and they were doing their own competitive sports. My sister was into swimming, my brother was into soccer. So it was just a lot of driving around. So I wasn't even allowed to do gymnastics twice a week until I was 10 years old, at which point my parents deemed that I was old enough to take public transit and get myself to and from gymnastics. So at the age of 10, I started going twice a week, which for advanced rec. And then at the age of 16, I started going 3 times a week in a very, very low level, I guess technically competitive program, but I don't really have any memories of actually competing. I think I was just training with that group. And I think this is a memory that every adult gymnast has where they're like 5 or 10 years older than everyone else that they're training with, but they're there because they just love the sport so much. And they have this strange role somewhere between being a coach and an athlete where they're kind of a mentor to their fellow teammates, but they're also learning gymnastics. So that continued until the end of high school. And then I was incredibly privileged to go to a university that had a student gymnastics club. I went to Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. And there are two coaches there, Peter and Jamie, who are older guys in their 50s or 60s, I think. And they just love coaching. They have been coaching the Queen's Gymnastics Club for decades, literally. And they don't get paid for it. So they rent space from a local gymnastics club, and the Queen's Gymnastics Club handles all of the registration and money. And then you just show up 3 times a week and do as much or as little gymnastics as you want to. You show up at whatever level you're at and go from there. And then there's some fun meets where the prizes are like bottles of wine. And if you come in first, you get a bottle of red. And if you come in fourth, you get a Smirnoff Ice or whatever it is. So those meets were a ton of fun and kind of silly. There were routines where you could tag team. So one person would do the dancey part of the floor routine and then they just tag off. Maybe they're injured or something. And another adult would go in and do the tumbling line and then they would tag back in.
That
So
sounds amazing.
it was super amazing, very informal, like best culture ever, so much fun. And I did that for 4 years. I was totally into it. I think I never missed a practice over 4 years. Even during exam break, everyone else was studying. And I was like, if I don't study, then I don't get to go to gymnastics. So I will study. It was the best motivator. Anyway, after I graduated from Queens, I did a 1 year master's degree in a different city. So I did some coaching there. And then I ended up moving to Calgary, and that was 11 years ago. In Calgary, I started off coaching just some regular rec gymnastics. By this point, I had what we call a big girl job. I was working as an engineer by day. And then one evening a week, I was coaching rec classes because I just loved it so much and had to be in a gym. And that evolved into eventually coaching performance teams. I had never heard of Gymnaestrada or performance teams growing up, but it really was the perfect niche for me. It's typically an advanced rec level of gymnastics. So people are working on up to round off, back handspring, back tuck, maybe a layout or two. And in addition to learning bars, beam, vault, floor, you're also putting together a group routine that involves dancing and formations and acrobatic tricks, and it can involve props and costumes, and there's a theme. And I found all of this to be so much fun. I don't consider myself to be a particularly creative person. As I said, I'm an engineer, but group choreography was my jam. Like it was my outlet, and I would be drawing these stick figure diagrams on paper, trying to come up with the coolest formations and transitions and acro tricks, building big pyramids. It was tons of fun. So I started to think to myself, I really need to learn more acro tricks. Like, where does one go to improve their repertoire of acro tricks so that I can teach them to my kids? And I discovered, this was right around the time that I downloaded Instagram for the first time. And I discovered this whole world of acro yoga. So
Mm.
I started looking through yoga studios in Calgary, looking for acro yoga. And then I dove in headfirst into the acro yoga community because honestly, it was the closest thing to adult gymnastics that I could find. It involves handstands and cartwheels and adults that like to move their bodies, that like to fall, that like to play, that like to laugh, that have to trust each other to learn tricks. And that was the community that I was really looking for. So I started to learn tons of acro tricks and got reasonably good at them. I guess when you have a gymnastics background, that helps. And I was bringing all of these tricks to my students. So I would teach them and I would demo them and I could do all of them. So logically, it followed that when one of my athletes was missing or injured, I would step in for them. And we had some big performances. We went to the Canadian Gymnaestrada in 2018, and one of my athletes was injured. And I wrestled myself into her little gym suit. She lent it to me. And I performed on the floor with my kids as a base because she was missing. And afterwards, I was like, this is so fun. Like, it's such a thrill. Performing in front of a crowd, I guess it's similar to competing. I wouldn't really know, but it's similar to competing because you have to perform. You only have one shot. It's got to be right now. But I think there's more to it than that because you're part of a team. So afterwards, you come through this bundle of nerves, this exhilaration and adrenaline together, and you feel so bonded because you did it. You performed together and you nailed all your acro tricks and everyone hit the timing of that beat drop to do the dance move. And it's awesome. I just loved the atmosphere of Gymnaestrada. I was hopelessly addicted.
Was that the first time when you stepped in for a student that you had performed for
I
gymnastics?
guess so. Yeah. I mean, I had stepped in for them before for smaller events and for even during practice if someone was missing, but that was my first time being in front of a really big crowd. And when I say big crowd, I mean like 400 people. It was a lot of people watching, and it was a huge adrenaline rush. I loved it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds awesome.
So what happened next was prior to 2018, while I was still coaching this kids group, I had my first child and went back to coaching like almost right away. I took a proper mat leave from my engineering job, but I didn't want to take a mat leave from coaching because I just loved it too much. And I used to bring my little baby son in his stroller, and the parents on the sidelines would take him for a walk so that I could coach their kids. We would like trade kids for an hour. They were so supportive. It was amazing. But then what happened was in 2018, I got pregnant with my second pregnancy. And I was like, okay, now I have two kids. I can't just be bringing them to gymnastics all the time. By the way, I should add, my husband is also a gymnastics coach, and he works evening hours for coaching his athletes.
Oh, wow.
So every time that I was coaching, I would either need to get childcare or I'd have to bring them with me. And his coaching job is like his real job, and my coaching job was like a fun after work job. So his coaching job took priority a little more. Anyway, so when I had the second pregnancy, it was, March, April, and one of my athletes, and her name is Kenya. She is now involved in CAPTivate. She'll come up again later. Kenya was already in grade 12 at this point, and she was getting ready to graduate. And so I thought it felt like a good time to retire from coaching. It's been fun. It's been my fun after work activity. Kenya's graduating. I'm going to have a second kid. Like, this is a good time to stop. So I told all the parents, I told the gym, this is my last year coaching the performance team, and then I'm going to retire. And then something really sad happened, which is that I lost that pregnancy. I lost it during the second trimester, which was pretty late, and I was totally heartbroken.
Yeah.
And then September rolled around and I didn't have a second kid and I didn't have a coaching job. And I felt really empty. Like, what am I supposed to do with all of this extra time?
Mhm.
And that was when CAPTivate was born.
Wow.
So I almost fit, sorry, I guess it's a little emotional, but it's almost like I gave birth to CAPTivate instead of giving birth to that kid, because it 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 was the pregnancy that didn't end up working out.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that.
Sorry, I guess that wasn't very eloquent, but
No, I mean, why would it be eloquent? I mean, that's very personal, and I can't.
mhm.
Yeah, gymnastics is already very emotional for a lot of adults, so that's wow. Thank you for opening up about that.
Well, thank you. I guess you could say it was like the biggest silver lining that ever happened from this tragedy.
Mhm.
That's my dog barking, so we'll just edit that part out. There we go. I guess you could say it was the biggest silver lining from that tragedy that happened, because I gave birth to a new gymnastics club instead. And Kenya was right there with me. By this point, Kenya was also coaching in addition to training. And Kenya said to me towards the end of her gymnastics, uh, children's gymnastics career, we'll call it, she said to me, Hayley, what are some good sports that you can do when you're an adult? Maybe I should take up rock climbing. I guess there are a lot of adults that enjoy rock climbing. And I think there was a small piece of my heart that just broke hearing her say that, because I was like, no, gymnastics is for adults too. I did gymnastics when I was 4 years past your age because I was doing it at university. But in Calgary, we don't have an adult gymnastics opportunity. And it really got the gears in my brain, It really got the gears in my brain grinding, because she should have that opportunity that I had to continue doing gymnastics throughout her university career and beyond. So, with Kenya's help, CAPTivate Gymnastics was born. And the name comes from, originally, it was called the Calgary Adult Performance Team,
Mm.
CAPT,
Mhm.
which turned into CAPTivate. So
I
we have a funny acronym spelling.
love it.
So the Calgary Adult Performance Team was born, and the very first session was that September 2018. And I crunched all the numbers and I calculated that we needed 10 athletes to break even. That would just cover our insurance costs, our club startup fee, and our rental time. And Kenya and I would both be coaching for free. And we were willing to do that to get this started. Kenya is amazing, by the way. I can't say that enough. Kenya and I were willing to coach for free to get this going. And on 24 hours before our first practice, which was a Tuesday at 7 p.m., on Monday at 7 p.m., we had 4 people signed up and we needed 10. So I said to Kenya, I don't think this is going to go. I guess adults aren't interested. And then that morning, Tuesday at like 11 a.m., we hit our 10th registrant. And I picked up the phone and I called the Alberta Gymnastics Federation. And I said, I'd like to register a new club starting today. And I paid the insurance, I paid the club startup fee. And then that night, we ended up having 18 adults show up for the first practice. And they had a great session. We had everyone from former gymnasts who used to be competitive, still had quite a lot of tricks in their portfolio, and they just missed having a place to train. And then we had total newbies. We had parents of gymnasts who had never done a somersault in their lives, but their kids were having a lot of fun and they wanted to give it a try. And then we had people from related sports like salsa dancing or country two-step dancing or CrossFit, who had some good functional movement, but they'd never formally done a gymnastics class before. Mm-hmm. And we taught them acro tricks and dancing and tumbling. And then we performed our routine in December of 2018 at a small-ish club event where we performed alongside 3 other clubs that were all kids' performance groups. Oh, wow. And it was awesome. We had so much fun. It was the best. So we continued in January, and then we performed in June of 2019 at the provincial event, which is called Alberta Gym Fest. And again, we were the only adult team performing alongside, this time, 25 different kids' performance teams. Wow. And I really think all the parents sitting in the audience, they must have been like scratching their heads thinking, I guess adults can do gymnastics too. I like to think that we started, changing lives already at that point. And then we have doubled in size every year. So September 2018, we had 1 team. September 2019, we started 2 teams. September of 2020, despite COVID, we started 4 teams. And at
Wow.
this point, we had 3 performance teams and 1 regular artistic gymnastics group. So this is like your normal adult gymnastics program where you meet up once a week and you're doing bars, beam, vault, floor, but there's no performance at the end. There was a request for that, so we started it. And now next September, or I guess this coming September, I'm already planning that we're going to have 7 teams, hopefully. So we've doubled every year for the first 4 years that we've existed. It's been so successful and it's been so fulfilling. And I just want to finish full circle by saying that I did end up having a second kid. He was born in September of 2019, which incidentally happened to be when Kenya decided to do a tour around Europe for several months. And so we had to bring in other people to coach our groups for us while we were both otherwise occupied. And that was a very big learning for me, to hand over the reins to somebody else and watch it not go as well as I had hoped. Because it really opened my eyes to how to run a business, and that your business is only as valuable as the people that you hire. And now I am so invested in my staff, in my coaches, because CAPTivate would be nothing without them.
Wow.
That's a little side story there. Okay, I feel like I've already said so many things, and all you asked me was about my own gymnastics story.
No, I think that's awesome. I'm so glad that you told me the whole story. I'm so happy to hear that it came full circle. You had a second child a year later. I mean, that's kind of like perfect timing. Awesome. And just hearing how you built CAPTivate and the growth, and I wish I was Canadian. I kind of want to go back to you make it sound very simple, not easy, but simple. And I think there are probably a lot of differences between how gymnastics insurance is structured in Canada compared to the US, because here I think it's not just, can we find 10 people? I think a lot of people in the community could, of course it's not easy, but yes, with enough time, with like 2 weeks maybe to prepare, and I could probably find 9 other people in LA, but the insurance just would be a nightmare. So how does that work in Canada? And it sounded like you had the 10, which became 18 initially, and you were able to just call up the federation and say that there was a new club. So tell me how structurally in Canada, like what are the things in place made that kind of happen in a sequential way?
Yeah, in a smooth fashion. Yes. Well, I have to say we're pretty lucky. So in Canada, every province and territory has their own provincial sport body. So we are part of the Alberta Gymnastics Federation, and there's BC Gymnastics and Gymnastics Ontario and whatever. And those organizations are essentially an alliance of all the gymnastics clubs that choose to participate. So there are also independent gymnastics clubs outside of these alliances. For example, Gymboree or My Little Gym, or like mostly recreational clubs that cater to kids up until age 12 or 14 sort of thing. And those, or clubs that are more circus-based. For example, they have some gymnastics, but they're more circus-based. Those clubs are independent and they don't belong to the federation. But the ones that have competitive programs, if you want to participate in any JO competitions, and by you, I mean your athletes, obviously, you have to belong to the federation. And the federation has one insurance provider that backs all of the gymnastics clubs. So for a tiny club like me, it's actually economically not advantageous to be a part of the federation. I've looked into it. I've looked into having separate insurance. But if you have an incident, the increase in premiums gets spread amongst all the clubs. So when other clubs have an incident, yes, their increase gets spread to me. But if I were ever to have an incident, knock on wood, which I have not, then my increase in premiums gets spread to everyone else as well. So we're all underwritten by the same insurance provider. And because there are athletes over the age of 18 in the competitive world, most notably the trampoline and tumbling programs, but also to some extent men's artistic, and to a growing extent women's artistic as well. The insurance underwriter has to insure adults over the age of 18. They have to. And so that paves the way for recreational adult classes to happen.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I don't know if in the US, we definitely don't have just one insurance, but also even the clubs, because of course there are a lot of gymnasts who go on to college, or so they'll come back and train, or, you know, people that just turn 18 before they go off to college. But I don't know if the insurance companies here have another cap, like, oh, at 25, this happens or whatever, which limits it. So yeah, it's really interesting and great that the system kind of makes it smoother for your team in Calgary. Like, as far as you know, like, how many other clubs exist like CAPTivate, and what do you think, based on everything that you've learned about managing the business, would it take for that type of model, at least in Canada, to scale?
Well, those are two very good questions. I am not aware of any other club really in the world that exists like CAPTivate. We don't own our own facility. We rent space from host gyms. And I've intentionally kept it this way because it allows us to be accessible all over the city. So we have teams in the south, in the north, in the west. So no matter where you live or where you work, there's always a team that's 15 minutes away.
Wow.
And I don't think there's any other gymnastics club in the whole country that I know of that is part of these provincial federations. So they're part of the official gymnastics world, not like a fitness world. But they don't own a facility. They rent space from a collection of other facilities. And in fact, the Alberta Gymnastics Federation has us all organized by zones, and Calgary is considered zone 3. And in September, we're going to be starting a team outside of Calgary. Wow. And I'm not really sure how the Alberta Gymnastics Federation is going to be classifying us at that point, because they've never had a club that geographically spreads beyond one zone. Mm-hmm. So their infrastructure isn't set up for it, and we're just smashing barriers all over the place. I do want to answer your second question, which is the scalability. And the answer is that it's really not that hard. I really think that these could be popping up everywhere. And one of my big goals for CAPTivate is actually to franchise it out across the country. So if anyone in Canada is listening to this podcast and you want to start a CAPTivate in your city, I would love for you to get in touch with me, because I really do want to grow this across the whole country. It helps to be a gymnastics coach already, to have that certification and experience. And it even helps to be a little bit aware of the world of Gymnaestrada, how to do group routines and teach acro tricks. But really all you need is a relationship with a host gym and your own social media skills, your own marketing skills, your own website skills, and you attract your own people, you find your own people, and you're basically running a small business that has no overhead. I mean, that's how we were able to start literally the day of, because we have no overhead. The overhead is like once a year, I pay a small business accountant to do my taxes, and that number doesn't change based on how much money I made every year. But aside from that, almost everything that I pay for is scalable. So if the class doesn't run, we don't pay rent, we don't pay coaches. If that person doesn't register, I don't pay insurance for that one person. So everything is scalable. It's an incredible business model. Pardon me for tooting my own horn here, but I think it's an incredible business model because it's so scalable. So you can have a full-time job, and if you have a bit of an entrepreneurial streak, you'd like to flex your business muscles, you can start a small gymnastics club one evening a week. You can make almost no money doing it, but have a ton of fun and not have anybody else telling you what to do. You get to be your own boss. And then if it's successful, you get to grow it to, 4+ teams. And at that point, you are making some money. I'm certainly not making a full-time salary, but I'm also not working full-time hours. And I'm starting to feel, before COVID happened, I should say, I'm starting to feel like the amount of hours that I'm putting into CAPTivate is now equal to the proportional salary I would like to be making from it. So for example, if I'm putting in 20 hours a week, I would like to make 50% of a reasonable salary. And I'm starting to feel like I'm at that point now. For the first 3 years, I was literally just making peanuts and running it for fun. But it has grown beyond my wildest dreams to the point where it's actually financially doing quite well. And so I would super encourage other people in the US, but also in Canada, where at least we have these provincial sport bodies already set up, reach out to me and let's make it happen together. I would love to grow this.
I think that sounds awesome. And I hope people listening take you up on that for sure. Because we do need as many gymnastics clubs as possible for adults countrywide. I think that would be amazing. You said that there's basically a team available within like 15 minutes of anybody in that geographic area. So I imagine that the teams are practicing at different gyms. How has the conversation been like when you approach a new gym? Is it pretty simple, and are you targeting specific hours where and do you have to only use the gyms when there are no other gymnasts like under 18, for example, training?
Yeah. So I am aware that for all of our host gyms, their athletes come first. And that makes perfect sense. I do not in any way think that I should get priority over those athletes. The gyms are making much more money and they have a much stronger commitment to their athletes than they do to us. The advantage to CAPTivate is that because we're adults, we can train late at night. So most of these gyms, their minor athletes finish at 8 p.m., say, and then they shut the doors and turn the lights off and the gym sits empty until whatever time the next morning. And so we are offering them the chance to make a little bit of money by doing nothing. They provide nothing to us, just the equipment. And we have a key. We lock up after ourselves. We clean everything. We put everything away. We provide our own coaches. We have our own insurance. All we need is their space when it would otherwise be empty. So it is a win-win for both parties because they get to make a little bit of cash off of something that they already own. And we don't have to carry the overhead of having a facility. Now, this would never work if I was running an all ages gymnastics program, because then I would need gym space at 6 p.m. and that's impossible to get. It only works because we fill our team with adults and night owls who are willing to train until 10 o'clock at night. Some of our teams run 7 to 9 p.m. Some run 8 to 10 p.m. We haven't gone later than 10 p.m. yet, but it's possible we might in the future. The one thing that I find quite difficult is that it is hard to plan ahead. So like I said, for September, we're hoping to run 7 teams, but I can't finalize which team is going to be running on which night until the host gyms have their own schedules in place. And if I can't figure out which team's running on which night, then I can't schedule all my coaches because some coaches don't want to drive across the entire city, or they only want to coach until 9 p.m., not until 10 p.m. So it constantly feels like I have 17 juggling balls in the air. One of the juggling balls, by the way, is my own nanny who doesn't know her own hours, next month because I haven't finalized my own coaching schedule yet. So I have 17 juggling balls in the air and I just keep juggling until one by one, the juggling balls start to land in their positions and then I can land other juggling balls. So you have to be okay with a certain amount of chaos and not disorganization, but continued organization for longer than it would normally take if you did own your own facility.
You definitely talk like an engineer. And I'm not, that's not an insult. I have an engineering degree, which I used for a few years. Civil engineering, I hated it.
Oh.
I definitely still sometimes think in that project managerial way. So I think that's awesome. I have a question for you that I didn't give to you in advance. So we'll see how this goes. It's pure theoretical. Based on what you know, having run this business and seeing like the numbers kind of double. And again, maybe you're not even thinking like this, but I just love future projecting out.
Mm-hmm.
So you specifically may not ever be interested in having an adults only gym where you own the facility and equipment, but based on what you know on what the numbers are and cost per gymnast, if you did want to someday, 10 years, 5 years down the road, open up an adults only facility where you own all the equipment, it's available, like what would be the numbers in terms of how many gymnasts, how many hours per day of training you had a specific number of gymnasts committed to before that would become, like, in your mind, based on what you know, financially doable?
Okay, I'll start off by saying it is never in my business plan to own a facility. That is something I've been really firm on, because the reason we're able to grow at the rate that we're growing is because our classes are inexpensive, because we don't have a ton of overhead. And if you own your own facility, you need to keep it as full as you can, as often as you can. So let's go down this path. Hypothetically, if I were going to own a facility, I'll tell you what I do. I would partner with a cheerleading team. That's what I'd partner with. Not a gymnastics club, a cheerleading team, because adult Gymnaestrada, or rather Gymnaestrada in general, only requires the floor. So we do have an artistic gymnastics program, as I said, now, because people asked for it. But 3 of our teams only train on the floor, and then they also use trampolines to learn some tumbling skills, but they're floor only teams, which also makes them extra attractive to people that used to be dancers and power tumblers who have no interest in swinging on the bars, but they want to maintain their, back handsprings and their aerials. So if you only need a floor, a sprung floor, with a bunch of mats, cheese mats, crash mats, mini tramps, then a cheerleading team is really the best industry to partner with. And then their kids groups would train until, say, 7:30, and then the adult groups would start after that. And that's how I would keep the gym full enough to have it making money. But like I said, that is not in the cards for CAPTivate. That is not one of my goals.
Yeah. Do you ever, so the average gymnast who's participating in a team, how many hours are they practicing per week?
Well, we have multiple teams. Each team is 2 hours. And prior to COVID, athletes could join as many teams as they wanted. During COVID, we set the restriction that we only want athletes doing 1 team per week, because we don't want any risk of cross-contamination if someone gets sick on one team. But after COVID is done and the world goes back to normal, then people will be able to train on more than 1 team. And in September, if all goes according to plan and all the host gyms, agree to host us on the nights that we've asked for, then we're going to have teams running on Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, every night of the week, but Friday and Saturday. And some of them will be artistic gymnastics, and some of them will be performance teams. And so you can pick and choose from a menu of adult offerings and train as many times a week at whichever facilities you want, doing whichever kind of gymnastics you want. You can follow your favorite coaches depending on where they're going, and you can train multiple times a week. And I already have people who are like, sign me up. I want to do it 3 times a week. I'm so excited.
Yeah, that sounds great. Okay, so thank you for playing that future projection exercise. Thank you for that. I mean, not many people want to. I mean, I can certainly see why, the more I talk with people on this podcast, the clearer it becomes that you don't need to be in a gym training 40 hours a week as an adult. If you're smart with your training, even Chelsea Memel, I mean, her family owns the gym, but she's not in there 8 hours every single day. She's in there maybe 2 to 3 hours, and a lot of that is conditioning. So yeah, it doesn't, but it's always interesting to kind of consider, okay, what are the pathways if that was ever something in the future. And yeah, I think partnering with the cheerleading team makes a lot of sense, because that's the biggest problem for a lot of adult gymnasts who just kind of are using their local gyms at the fringes and feel like they have to not be the priority and get off the equipment if the younger JO team need it, but cheerleading team only needs the floor, so that makes perfect. All right, so going back to the concept of Gymnaestrada, which I've never heard of before, and I don't know why, because it sounds amazing. Tell me a little more about that, and like, how popular is it? I imagine like many things, like the US is just like does its own thing and is included in this amazing. Like, what are the events like? And is it international?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked. Okay, Pam, I also have been in gymnastics my entire life, and I had never heard of Gymnaestrada, or specifically World Gymnaestrada, until like 2 years ago. So it's this extremely well-kept secret that I would like to share with as many people as I can. It is the funnest, in my opinion, form of gymnastics that exists. Because like I said, it has that team component and it has all that creativity, but it's still gymnastics. It's still tumbling and acrobatic tricks, and it's tons of fun. And so I would guess that most people who've done artistic gymnastics have performed in Gymnaestrada in some fashion without even realizing it. If you did a club showcase where you and your group put together a little dance, and then at some point you all did a tumbling line, and then you had an end pose type thing, then that is Gymnaestrada. But Gymnaestrada goes so much further beyond that, and I had no idea. You can do Gymnaestrada in your own local area, and then you can move on to the provincial or the state level where they have a showcase. It's always a showcase. It's not a competition. But then they have national events too. So in Canada, we have the Canadian Gymnaestrada every 4 years. It's always held the year before World Gymnaestrada, that I had no idea existed until recently. And I went to World Gymnaestrada in 2019. It was hosted in Austria, and there were 65 countries participating. There were 18,000 athletes, and I am told the average athlete age was 35 years old.
Wow.
So you absolutely do have kids there. And I would say that from Canada and from the US, particularly these two countries, the average age is like 16 because they only send kids. But if you watch the routines, Switzerland sends 3,000 athletes, and more than half of them have gray hair. They do these incredible routines that are so creative. And the gymnastics is not hard. They're not doing backflips, but it's impressive and it's clean and it's really creative. They might have really creative props that they're using, or they make really cool shapes. And they're so much fun to watch, and they're so inspiring. Honestly, at the end of the routines, sometimes people are like standing ovation just for the fact that they're elderly and they're doing a great job and they're enjoying gymnastics at an older age. I think one of the things that has allowed gymnastics to be so mainstream in Europe, but so uncommon for adults here in North America, is that in North America, when we think gymnastics, we think handstands and backflips. But in Europe, gymnastics has more of a, I'll almost say, military definition, like front support and rear support and log rolls. All of that is still considered gymnastics. And I guess we consider that to be gymnastics at the preschool level here. But when you think gymnastics for an adult, you're not thinking front support. So you would never, or I would never, prior to going to World Gymnaestrada, I would never think that people in their 70s could do gymnastics. But gymnastics has such a broad definition, and we need to embrace all of it. And seeing people in their 70s holding a side plank and then doing a log roll and then standing up and whipping open a fan and fanning themselves, and they all have different colored fans, and they're red on one side and yellow on the other side, and they're making all kinds of cool imagery with those fans. All of that is gymnastics too. And I loved that. I love that. So the next World Gymnaestrada is in Amsterdam in 2023. And a typical World Gymnaestrada cycle is 2 years of training leading up to that. So that means CAPTivate will be starting our first ever World Gymnaestrada cycle this coming September. And we'll train for 1 full year, weekly, 2 hours a week, to perform at Canadian Gymnaestrada, which will be next summer. And if we do well and we are selected to represent Canada, each country only has a certain number of spots. And so we would be trying to snag one of those spots. If we are selected, then we would train for a second full year, mostly doing upgrading and polishing, things like that. And then we would go to Amsterdam, which is a 7-day-long gymnastics festival. And each group performs 3 times. The routines are 15 minutes long, which is long. Yeah, it's a cardio workout. The routines are 15 minutes long. You perform 3 times over the course of 7 days. And then you spend a whole bunch of time touring around, like getting to know the city that you're in, and also watching tons of other routines. And some of the routines from these other countries, they have the same number of spots as Canada or the US does, but they don't have 40 people on their team. They have 250 people on their teams. Oh, and they have massive pieces of equipment like swinging rings and trampolines, and even like multiple sets of parallel bars where they have men who clearly used to be competitive mag gymnasts doing super impressive parallel bar stuff in the background with like dancers with umbrellas in the foreground. You know what I mean? It's like such a combination of skill levels and skill sets, and the creativity is unbelievable. Like watching people find the strengths within their team and then find a way to showcase that and make these really cool pictures and images. It's like Cirque du Soleil. It's like America's Got Talent. It's so much fun to watch. These routines are amazing. And just the whole experience of like traveling with your team, lots of recreational level gymnasts who didn't compete internationally, they don't know what it's like to get on an airplane wearing a Team Canada tracksuit or Team USA tracksuit. And you all have matching backpacks. And then as a team, you all get off the airplane together, you get on the bus together, you have all of your meals together. It's such a bonding experience, and it's so fun to represent your country on an international level without having to train 35 hours a week to do it. So I highly recommend, if you love recreational level gymnastics, but you want that travel opportunity, you should really look into Gymnaestrada. It's the best.
That sounds awesome. I don't even know. I would have to look up the availability in the US, but I think just sign me up I would love to just go as a spectator in
yes. Yes, you can go as a spectator. And in the places where they're hosted, like Austria and the Netherlands, because gymnastics is so much more mainstream and acceptable, they do get tons of local spectators who they pay. So they have evening events that are paid events where they cull some of the best routines from the different countries, and then they turn them into like paid evenings. And the tickets are like 50 euros. The tickets are very expensive, and they sell out because all of the locals and also all of the athletes from other teams, they want to pay big money to watch these amazing routines. Like I said, it's the same as going to the circus for the night. And if you would pay, I mean, to go to Cirque du Soleil in Canada is like $100 or $120 for a ticket. And people pay that, and they see, high quality acrobatic tricks. And it's essentially the same thing, that you can go to World Gymnaestrada, pay 50 euros and have an evening of entertainment. The locals are all over it. It's tons of fun.
Oh, I think, thank you for telling us all about that. I think it sounds very exciting. And you made such a great point when you talked about in North America, gymnastics is perceived as handstands and backflips, and there's so many ways to look at gymnastics, but for better or worse, at least in the US, it's what is the most monetizable and what is the most flashy. It's the Olympics. And the women's artistic gymnastics event is one of the biggest moneymakers at the Olympics. And, you know, I focus a lot on women's artistic gymnastics on the podcast because it's what I experienced. But I think it's a great reminder that if we want adult gymnastics to take off and become more mainstream in the US and Canada and anywhere, we have to not just think about, not just try to break the mold in terms of what a body type looks like or what age you can start or what age you can peak, but also what are the types of things that you're doing. And that means going beyond women's artistic gymnastics or artistic gymnastics, and considering that you can compete doing recreational level and still, like, you can focus more on the team. Because that's also an experience I don't think, like, having competed a little bit, and it wasn't as an adult, the team cohesion is not really there. Everybody is just, yeah, there's a team score, but everybody's really just focused on their individual score. So yeah, I think Gymnaestrada sounds like the perfect gateway, one of the many gateways that are available for adult gymnastics to become to the point where we just say gymnastics and stop differentiating between kids doing gymnastics and adults doing gymnastics.
Isn't that the dream, Pam? To stop having to differentiate between kids and adults? That is the dream. And I think your podcast is helping us get there. So thank you for that.
Thank you. I hope so. It just feels weird to like just say I'm an adult gymnast. I'm like, okay, what does that even mean? That could mean so many, you know? One of the things I want to ask you about, one of the final things I want to ask you about is, how do you balance being, you're a mom and a wife, but you're also an athlete and a coach and a business owner? I think there's so many people in adult gymnastics who have that kind of entrepreneurial bent and are interested in doing more for gymnastics, but it's hard because right now it seems like if a lot of people feel like they have to choose, like, oh, well, if I run the team and I'm the coach, then how am I going to train myself?
Pam, I'm also an engineer. I do still have a day job.
I mean to like discount that at all. I just I forgot. On top of all of that.
That's okay. Yes, well, I'm very busy, I guess you could say. To speak specifically to balancing the coach, athlete, business owner part of things, I guess when CAPTivate first started and Kenya and I were the only two coaches, we were very much in the coaching role, and I was spending a bunch of time doing administrative stuff on the side. And it wasn't until we grew to 2 teams that I really got to start taking advantage of being an athlete as well. And now this session, when we've had 4 teams, it's been amazing. So I'm the coach of 2 of the teams, of 2 of the 4. One of the teams, Kenny is the coach, and I trust her 1,000%, so I don't need to be there for that. And then the 3rd team is run by other coaches who are fantastic and have lots of experience, but I'm an athlete on the team, so I get to just offer little bits of feedback here and there and help to mentor them. As I said earlier, that experience with not having that one session go as well as I'd hoped has really shown me the value of mentorship. And I love being an athlete on the team because in my experience, it's the best way to be a mentor and to get a workout in and to be a role model for all the other coaches and all the other athletes as well. I mean, I tell people that I started CAPTivate so I could be on CAPTivate, which is so true. I started it so that I could be an athlete because I was doing it for the kids' performance teams. And I was like, why doesn't this exist for adults? So I created it, and now I'm an adult athlete, and it's the best. But I love when my coaches are also athletes on other teams because it helps to standardize our offering. It helps to make sure that the culture, the adult gymnastics culture, which I know you had a whole podcast on, and I loved that episode, by the way, about the adult gymnastics culture. It's so important to us, and having coaches go back and forth between different teams helps to standardize that culture across the whole organization. So I love that. And as far as being a mom and an engineer and a wife, all of those other parts, Well, we do spend a fair amount of money on childcare, I will say, because we have a nanny during the day and then at least 2 evenings a week when my husband is working in the evening. Then we also have a nanny in the evening to look after the kids so I can go coach. But the plus side is that my husband doesn't work in the mornings. His workday is like noon to 8 p.m., Sunday to Thursday. And then my workday is more like Monday to Friday, more 9 to 5-ish, but not really. So the kids, they spend equal amounts of time, I think, with me and with my husband, which is kind of a unique and amazing parenting situation, that they get to spend all the mornings with their dad and then most evenings with me, and then all day Friday with their dad, but then all day Sunday with me. It's pretty fantastic. And I have to give my husband a lot of credit. He has been an amazing partner in helping me to realize this dream. I certainly could not have done it without him.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I think to sum it up, yeah, you needed it to exist. And so you created it. And it sounds like it's doing big things. Where can people find you and CAPTivate Gymnastics online and on social media? And I'm curious if some of the upcoming programming for summer and beyond, are those open to people outside Canada, if any of the listeners outside Canada are interested?
Well, we don't offer online programming right now. Like, I know some gyms have transitioned to that. All of our classes are in person. So if you would like to come and visit Calgary for an extended period of time, like 3 or 4 weeks, then we'd love to have you on one of our teams. But we don't have any drop-ins, unfortunately, with COVID. And also drop-ins are offered elsewhere. That is a market that we're not interested in.
Okay.
But if people will come visit Calgary, I would love to have them come and visit a team practice or participate in several weeks. That would be awesome. My personal Instagram, where you can find me doing all of my own gymnastics, is Hayley Calgary, Hayley Calgary. And our team Instagram is CAPTivate.gymnastics. And our website is CAPTivateGymnastics.com. So you can find everything there. And if you go to CAPTivateGymnastics.com, one of our pages is the gallery page, where you can find videos of some of our previous group routines. And I recommend those. Those are a good 10 minutes of your time watching and enjoying all the different levels coming together and how much fun everyone is clearly having. I love those.
Thank you so much, Hayley, for joining. I've loved hearing about what CAPTivate is doing and learning about Gymnaestrada. And hopefully I for all of us, we will return to normal programming, and hopefully I'll meet you someday, maybe even in Amsterdam. I'll come and watch you either perform or just, yeah, it'll be great. You definitely,
I would love that. Pam, I do hope that you're able to find a Gymnaestrada team somewhere near you where you can have the full experience of like traveling to Europe. It's so much fun. And I know people who've been going for year after year after year. It's like, I liken it to sleepaway camp, if you ever did that as a kid, where you go to sleepover camp and then you spend the entire school year just waiting for it to be summertime so that you can go back to sleepover camp. That's what World Gymnaestrada is like. You go to one and you're so hopelessly addicted, you spend the next 4 years just planning out how you can get back. And they're not cheap. It's expensive to save up your money to go to World Gymnaestrada every 4 years because they're in Europe, but it's so worth it. And the community is so amazing. And that is what I wish everywhere. I wish that adult gymnastics everywhere had that community and that normalcy and that sense of accomplishment. Even though we're just performing, we're not competing. We're there for the sheer love of gymnastics.
Yeah. I think that's the most important aspect of the adult gymnastics. It is the community, because I personally feel like most of the skills that I've had trouble with throughout my life, it was mainly because I just didn't have the community and support and the feeling that I could do it. So I think the community just helps one's gymnastics like a dozenfold. So thanks again, Hayley.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, thanks, Hayley. I'm excited to learn more about Gymnaestrada, and yeah, thanks for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, Pam. This was really fun, and it's always so much fun to passionately gush about adult gymnastics to someone else who loves it too. So thank you for giving me this opportunity. It was awesome.